Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be a buyer's guide from Mitsubishi Evo 7. Okay, so the video today, this is our Evo 7. It's actually one of our shop cars. So this particular model is a Mitsubishi Evo 7 RS. So slightly different to the GSR, but I can go into those differences later on. General buyer's guide for Mitsubishi Evo 7. We're going to start with the bodywork. So we'll have a little walk around the car, but this sort of thing will apply to most Evos. So generally speaking, when you're looking at the outside of the car, paintwork is a first, obviously that's the most obvious thing you see. So it's good to check for any sort of discrepancies in paint colour, any dings and dents, and also panel gaps is a telltale sign if the car's been in an accident or not. So going over the car, you should always have like even panel gaps down the, down the sort of between the bonnet and the wings. Should be a nice straight line, even gap. And that applies to everything really, doors, sills, boot lid, bumpers. Just give it a good look over, make sure the panel gaps are good and there's no obvious signs of crash damage. These cars, at the end of the day, they're enthusiast-owned cars, so they're more than likely have had a little bit of paint in their life. And this one is a 2001 car, so it's over 20 years old, and it's seen a little bit of action in its life. So check the bodywork. Again, it's one of those things, they're never going to be perfect unless you're buying a really, really concours car, and it's something that can always be done. So in my opinion, bodywork's, obviously it's nice if it's all looking fresh and clean, but it's not a make or break deal on the car, because these things, what they are now, the age of them and the sort of mileage they're getting to, the more important thing is the mechanical condition of the car, and even more important than that is the actual underbody side, which I'll get into in a little while, and we'll go underneath the car and have a look at those points as well. A couple of common things on these, on the outside of the body is the corrosion. So they have aluminium bonnets, aluminium wings, and they do suffer from aluminium corrosion. Little edges down near the back of the front wheel. This one's pretty good actually, but there's sometimes aluminium corrosion just bubbles up and blisters, and you can see that on the wings, and they do get to a point where they are almost corroded and they break away some of the mounting points on the wings, so that could be a problem. And last time I inquired, the front wing on an Evo 789 is about £850 plus the VAT, so it's a very expensive panel to replace, so you want to make sure the front wings are good. Likewise on the back, they do suffer from corrosion on the back edge. This one's got a little bit of gravel rash where it's chipped away at the paint, but more importantly is there's a double skin on the rear arches, and these blister, they blow, and then you could be into like rear quarter replacements. So it's always good to just run your fingers on the inside of the arch and just make sure it's quite smooth and it's not blistered and started to split, because that is again an expensive repair and quite a common thing. Come around to the back end. Again, apart from the obvious paintwork, a good thing to look out for is corrosion on the boot lid. If I just quickly pop the boot lid, pop the bonnet while I'm at it. Good thing to do is always check inside the boot lid, along the seams of the boot where it actually hits or meets the car. There's some little rubber bungs there. It's always good to wind them out, have a look around that hole there, because that is where, if any water ingress was going to get in, it would start rotting out from there. So check along there. Always good to look around the spoiler as well, because water can sit on the boot lid, and again, they can corrode and rust through. So apart from, the obvious paintwork, the main things are what I've mentioned. Again, it always comes down to corrosion on these cars. I'll just pop the fuel filler cap, because again, it's always worth looking inside there. Again, that's the point where you will see corrosion. So just pop the boot and the fuel filler cap. Have a good look in there. This one's pretty good. But again, where the fuel filler cap is, you can take the cap off and just look around the rim there, and that'll be that's the sort of area prone to rust as well. So again, you don't particularly want to get into fabrication on these cars, because it does mount up and it does get quite expensive. So they're the main pointers on the bodywork, and then there's also areas underneath to look out for, which we'll go into when I get the car up on the ramp. So let's take a look in the engine bay. So once you've popped the bonnet, have a good look in the engine bay. Start with the visuals, look for the corrosion. Slam panels at the front, So this one has got quite a bit of corrosion just built up on it, just surface rust, but again an area where it's quite prone to corroding, which isn't a problem. Worst case scenario, you can buy these panels and you can replace them. More importantly, strut tops. So where the suspension comes through the top of the strut tower, have a good look around the seams, make sure there's no bulges or bubbles coming out of the top of the strut or around the side, because they rust from the inside out. So it's worth having a good look around that, because that is an area which is again very expensive to repair if you need to get into all of that. So front strut tops, chassis legs at the front as well. Generally speaking, the Evos don't suffer too badly on the front end. It's more the rear end you need to be worried about, but if they are bubbling and blistering at the front, then it's probably a sign that the rear end is going to be worse. So if it's clean at the front, it's a good starting point. The aluminium corrosion I mentioned, we've got a little bit on this bonnet. So this car, I have got another video out on our channel, so if you go back a few months or even a year, I think I bought this car a good year ago. Bought it off a customer with a problem, and it is one of the highest mileage Evo 7s we've ever looked after. So the reason we bought it was basically because the customer got into a position where they couldn't repair it. There was a fault that was very, very difficult to find and to repair, and we ended up purchasing it off the customer because they came to their end of their life with it. But yeah, it's quite an interesting car to me because it's an Evo 7 RS. It's got some special diffs in it, quite a rare car, but it's also a very high mileage car. So it's nice to buy it and to see how a car fares after that sort of mileage. I think it's got 153,000 miles on it, so fairly leggy in the Evo world. But yeah, there was lots of work to be done on it, which we have done over the course of the last year. So it has had a full engine build, forged engine, and it's also on a Link ECU as of last week. So we're going to be doing some development work on our tuning packages for the Link. Hence why we bought it. Really, it's a bit of a demo car, a bit of a test mule, and it's something to widen our experience with all the tuning platforms on it as well. So it's not the prettiest car. You'll be going around it looking at it and thinking, that's not the best example, but it is, like I say, it's a genuine, honest car, high mileage, and yeah, it's no show queen, but it's definitely a good fun, good solid, genuine car. So engine bay wise, once you've had a look at the corrosion, engine, you'll probably know if you've gone to view a car what spec it is and what you're going to be sort of expecting in terms of modifications. This one looks fairly straightforward, fairly simple underneath the bonnet, just purely because we haven't made it Larry and we haven't done a lot of bolt-on bits to it, although it is a forged engine. Looks quite standard under here. Just check the usual stuff, check for oil leaks, check for around the rocker cover. There's always rocker cover gaskets can leak, there's little banjo bolts down by the front, common problems, and down you can just about see the bottom of the head gasket as well. So it's always good to look at the corners of the head, just make sure there's no oil leaking out of the head, because you could be into a bigger problem. But yeah, it's usual stuff really. Dip the oil, check the top of the oil cap, check the levels, make sure they're all okay. Do all this cold, so try and get to the car cold. Ask the owner of the car before you get to it not to start it. It's always good to have a look at the car cold and start the engine from cold as well, so you can check for any sort of blue smoke or any rough idling when cold. So yeah, I think apart from under the top of the engine, have a good look under the car where it's been parked. Make sure there's no leaks front or rear of the car, because it's obviously got transmission at the front, gearbox, transfer box, and the engine obviously that can leak oil. So just have a good look under the car, look on the floor, make sure there's no leaks from this area and from the rear end, because you've obviously got the rear diff and the AYC at the back as well. So yeah, they're the basics to look out for. Next stage would be getting inside the car and starting it up. Something I forgot to add whilst in the engine bay is just check the chassis number and check the engine code. So on the bulkhead behind the well, in front of the driver's seat, this side you've got the chassis number. Evo 789s, they all start with CT9A, so that's basically the chassis number for a Evo 7, 8 or 9. And then just check the codes match up with the logbook, so you've basically got the right car for the right paperwork. Other thing to mention is the engine code. Quite difficult to see, but with a mirror and a torch you could probably get to it. So under the exhaust manifold on the block, you've got some numbers there. So basically you can find the codes, there's loads of them. I don't know them off by heart because there's so many of them, but you can find it on a forum and it will say what code is related to what car, so you can check if it's basically got the right engine in it for the car. It's not unusual to find that the car's had an engine swap because of the nature of the car, like I said earlier, but it's probably worth checking just so you know if it is an Evo 7 engine with an Evo 7. It's always nice to know what's in it. Ideally, you don't want an earlier engine in a later car because they've improved them as they've gone on. So you don't want to basically buy an Evo 7 with a 4 engine because that'll be a bit of a downgrade. But it's definitely something to worth looking at, worth checking. And again, turbo as well. If it's modified, they'll probably list what turbo it's got. But again, you can see what turbo it's got by looking on the plaque at the end of the turbo, which is fairly visible. You'll be able to do it again, like I say, with a torch through the pipework. You'll be able to see. So yeah, chassis number, engine code, and turbo number, always something worth checking. Okay, so once you get into the car, it's good to have a look at the general condition of all the working parts, really. You know, like steering wheel, stalks, gear knob, handbrake, because over the mileage, over the years, these things do get quite worn. Again, most of it's replaceable and easy enough to get hold of still in second-hand form, but it's also worth looking at things like, you know, the carpet and the seats, because believe it or not, you can find, or we do see a lot of cars that come in that have actual holes in the carpet because of the age of them, where your feet sit with the pedals. We have found out that carpets do get holed, and obviously that's quite a big job to replace the whole carpet. So pick up the mat, make sure there's no holes in the carpet. Seats wise, there's lots of different options on the seats depending on what model you get. This car, like I said, is actually an RS, so it didn't come with these seats from factory, but these are the standard Evo 7 Recaros. They're quite snug fitting. Once you sit in them, you will realise they're quite figure hugging. So just have a good look at the bolsters and make sure they're still plump and still firm, and there's no rips and tears in the upholstery, because if they've had, like, you know, a bit of wear and tear and a lot of use, then they can split the sides of the seats, and where your sort of hips touch, they've got a metal frame, and sometimes they can bend out and break and rip the material as well. So again, it's an older car, you're going to find little bits and pieces with it, but just something that's quite useful to check as a visual, easy thing to look at, something you notice all the time, so you want it right from the get-go, I'd say. Spec on these cars, they're all pretty similar, apart from this car, which is an RS. So all the GSRs, all the FQs, they're basically the same in terms of seats, options with the steering wheel, the aircon. But if you do opt for an RS like this one, you will get a different looking steering wheel, a little bit more basic. You'll have the option of aircon and no aircon, and you'll also have the option for windows, windy windows or electric windows. So you'll obviously know what you're getting yourself into if you opt for one of those, but just check they all work, check the operation of all the lights, usual stuff like indicators, brake lights, that sort of thing. Make sure there's no electrical gremlins. Good thing to do is check the ignition without starting the car. So turn the ignition on and just check. This car's not got the AYC, but we'll put a clip in of a car with the AYC. So you turn the ignition on and you'll see the 3 lights light up. Just make sure those 3 lights do light up all consecutively, because a common issue with these cars is the AYC. If you have an AYC fault and someone has removed bulbs out of the dash, then that's an easy way to sort of disable the fault code on the car. So I'll show you what I mean on this video, but basically it's got an ACD button, turn the ignition on, all 3 lights should light up, and then if you press the tarmac snow gravel light, you should see the lights scroll through each mode, and if it doesn't, then someone's tampered with it and potentially hiding an AYC fault. So that's a very important thing, easy one to look for if you know how. And then just check the mileage basically on the speedo, make sure that sort of lines up with all the MOT history, and you can check the service history as well, you know, recent servicing, make sure it all tallies up. The best way to do it is an MOT check. Go online, it's free, it's easy, put the reg in and it'll bring up all the MOT history, mileages over the last years it's had MOT, so that's a good way to check mileage is genuine. But in theory you can sort of tell how the car is and how worn it is, and if that car is very, very clean and it's got low mileage, and obviously that's a good sign, it sort of tallies up. But if you get a low mileage car on the clocks and the rest of it looks quite worn for its age, then obviously alarm bells will signal, and then you can look into it a little bit further to see if there's any discrepancies that way. But generally speaking, interior is pretty visual, all quite easy to check for. sit in the car, look out the windscreen, check for any chips, because sometimes you can't notice them until you actually sit in the car. So good thing to do is sit in the car, look through the windscreen and make sure there's no chips on the windscreen as well, because they're getting harder and harder to find, these window screens now. So worth looking at that. And then lastly, I'd probably say, because a lot of these cars have been modified, there's sometimes different gauges and different things being put on the dash or even screwed into the dash. So this car's got a little gauge on it, but it's just been stuck on with a sticky pad, which is quite nice because it means no one's like drilled through the dash. Nothing worse I find than all the plastic dash and top of the dash that's got holes in it. It looks very unsightly. So again, you don't really want to get into it changing dashboards because it is a large job, quite time consuming. So just check trims, basic stuff. So I think that's pretty much it for the interior. We'll get the car in the workshop and we'll take it out for a test drive. So a nice little mechanical one to check for is brakes, tyres and suspension. So this car has got aftermarket calipers on it. As you can see, they're Alcon calipers. Most of the cars, well, come standard with the red Brembos. So you want to have a little look at those because they are very prone to going sort of pinky colour. The lacquer lifts and then water gets under it and they go pink. So to refurbish a full set of them is quite expensive to do it properly. So it'd be nice to know that the car's either had them done already or that they're in good condition as it starts with, or alternatively got some aftermarket calipers on it. So this is a bigger brake kit, nice Alcon kit, still fits under 17-inch wheels. So that is a great option if you can find a car with them on. Quite an expensive kit, but again, most cars come with the Brembos, or they do come with the Brembos as standard. So just check the, I think the rear of this car has got standard calipers on it. So yeah, the red Brembos on this, these are quite fresh. They still look nice and red, but we've got some over there we'll show you now that are gone pink, lacquer's lifted, and they're going off a refurb. So they normally cost about £150 to £200 per caliper to refurbish. And obviously with that, with them being old and original, the pistons and the rubbers and the seals go, so it means the efficiency of them isn't going to be great as well if they haven't been refurbished. So it's always good to get a car with refurbished calipers if you can. If not, you need to maybe allow for that into the budget of buying the car. Tyres, again, quite a straightforward check. Just check they've got plenty of tread. Good to get on the floor and look on the inside of the tyres, because some of these cars do run excessive camber, and you may find that they look okay from the outside or the first half of the tyre, but when you get on the inside of the tyre, it's actually, we see it quite a lot where it's bold and even showing the actual wire. So put the car on full lock and then you can check the inside of the tyre properly. The last thing is the dampers on the car. Evo 7s, they all come with black stock dampers. Some of the 8s and 9s come with the yellow Bilsteins. But the dampers are very hard to replace in the black standard form. They don't really sell them anymore. So just check for leaks, check for the condition, make sure they're not rusty, the bodies of the dampers aren't corroded, but mainly check for misting around the damper body itself, just so they haven't got any leaks, and make sure they work properly. It's something you can test on a test drive, you can see it's not knocking and it's rebounding properly. But yeah, cars of this age, this era, they've normally had maybe a set of coilovers or potentially an upgrade to the later version OEM style Bilstein yellow dampers. So yeah, 3 basic things there to check, quite obvious, quite easy to do. Okay, now we've got the car in the workshop, we've got it up in the air. I'm just going to go underneath it and just point out a few things that we would suggest to look out for when buying a car. I know it's quite difficult because not all of you have got access to a ramp, but it's a good idea to at least stick your head under it and have a look at the underside. If you can get it to a garage, get it in the air, or even come to us for a pre-sale inspection, then that is obviously advised. It's good to get underneath it because, like I said earlier, the underside of these cars can make or break the car really if it needs fabrication work. So let's get under it, have a little look. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, this car is a high mileage car and it's had a little bit of a life. So it's not a show car by any means, and it's probably typically what you'd see on a used car that's not been refurbished or particularly well undersealed. So there is a few things, and it's a perfect car really to show you guys what to look out for, because there is a few little bits on it. Certainly it's got its fair share of surface corrosion. This particular car is not rotten, which is good, and it's all salvageable. Underneath this car is quite muddy rather than rusty. I mean, there is rust on it, but there's also quite a lot of surface grime. So this one is due in the diary for a good underbody hot wash to actually clear it up and inspect the underside. But if you can get underneath it, the main thing on these cars that go are the chassis legs. So you've probably seen it, heard it all before. We've done a lot of videos on it, and we do loads and loads of chassis leg replacements. There's nothing wrong with getting a car that needs chassis leg replacements. You just need to probably allow that in the budget, because it is a large job. It's a good 2 to 3 weeks work. Money wise, you're probably into sort of £5 plus to do the chassis legs, and then again, once you get into these sort of jobs, you can unravel other things. So it's always good to have a look at the underside, because that is going to be where the money is going to be spent if there is a problem. So either side of the car, you've got the chassis legs from the back end of the car all the way up, goes up and over the subframe, and then joins into the sill down here. But common places where you can check, they'll bulge up from here. So this is quite an exposed area. You can get a good visual on it. You can probably do that from actually underneath the car, with the car on the floor. So you can actually get under there, have a good look, have a little feel, and check both sides. And if you see it blistering and bubbling, then that means that it's rotting from the inside out. So check that on both sides. The chassis leg comes down here where the subframe mounts, and this is a more prone error, I guess, because it's a little bit hidden. You can't always see it. It's a little bit harder to detect, especially if the car's had under seal put on it, because that does cover a lot of sins. So ideally, you want to get yourself right underneath the car and have a look here. So basically, the subframe's there, just behind the subframe, up there where it mounts to. They blister and bulge from there as well. So very important to do that. In the rear end, you've got, this car's an RS, so it's got an RS diff. There's no AYC, so you can't check the AYC pump, but normally if it has got one, it would be in that corner there. So on the passenger side, the near side of the car, you've got the AYC pump. Check that's there for a start, because sometimes I've seen cars that have been bought and they haven't actually got a pump in there. Check it's there, check it's not leaking. Normally if they do have fluid residue around them or leaks, drips, then it normally means that the pump could be corroded and cracked and leaking from the pump itself. Fuel filler neck, this one's had a new one. You can see it's nice and black and shiny. Again, really common. Fuel filler necks rot out. It's good if it's had one. If it hasn't, it's not the end of the world, but it is almost like a £300 part just to get hold of one. So it's something worth inspecting. Yeah, the rear end, check the rear diff, AYC bath on it as well. Just make sure there's no leaks from the drive shaft ends or the actual seals and bungs on the diff. Moving forward, chassis again. I mean, this car, like I say, it's got a lot of surface rust, but it's really solid. Just needs a good clean up, rust treat. Make sure there's no holes, especially around the back end. You've got these two sort of holes that come from factory. Just make sure they're solid and not really thin, and you can't basically break the material away there. And the same goes to the front end. This one is really good, it's really solid. It is, like I say, surface rust, but again, that's not a problem. There's plenty of metal there and it's not flaking away. So structurally, it is sound, but that is something to point out, because they do really get thin and flaky there, and we've seen them hole there as well as along the sills. So make sure the sills are straight as well and not being jacked incorrectly, because there is a jacking point here, but just make sure they've not been crushed, because when they get crushed, they split the sills and they can obviously get water ingress in there and can cause extra corrosion and cause the seal to rot out quicker. And if you're into seal replacement, seal reconstruction, again, it's fabrication work, making the panels, and it's very time consuming, which means it's quite an expensive repair. Up the front end, metal subframes, they always have surface corrosion, paint flakes off them, and they do get quite corroded. Again, it's not the end of the world if they are, just make sure they're not holed and really weak. We do, it's quite a common thing actually at Auto Talk, we do a drive-in, drive-out replacement subframe service, so we have them on the shelf refurbished, ready to swap out. Just makes it a nice visual, because these tend to rust quite early before the rest of the car. Quite a nice bolt-on part that can transform the look of the car underneath. As mentioned, when I was in the engine bay, they've got obviously a gearbox, transfer box, and the engine to look out for under here in terms of oil leaks. Check the sump as well. This one's had a new sump because it's had an engine build, but they do get really rusty, especially around this plate here, and they do get quite porous and they can actually leak through the sump. So something to look out for on the sump pans. And oil coolers always at the front as well. Oil cooler, this has had an upgraded one, modified lines, but the standard lines are very prone to rusting and corroding as well. So just check the oil cooler lines are okay and the cooler itself. And lastly, up the front end is a front slam panel. So there's a panel here that holds the radiator, intercooler, aircon, everything, part of the structure of the front of the car. Again, very prone to rusting, corroding out. This one's got surface rust, usual stuff, nothing major, but we have seen these hole and rot. So you obviously don't want to be into replacing that on a brand new car you've just bought. So keep an eye on that. You can probably see that from the floor, actually, just looking under the front bumper. And it's also good to check that there's been no accident damage on that front panel, because generally speaking, a lot of accidents are front end, and they do normally take out the rads, the intercoolers, and bend this front panel. So if the car's got like new radiator, new aircon rad, new intercooler, just check that the front end's structurally sound and straight, because as a telltale sign, if everything's new on the front end, it may mean that it's had a little bump and it will be replaced. But check the front end's straight and chassis legs are straight and no problems there. It's a good little tip. But yeah, I think that's underneath for the car. We'll take it out for a test drive, and I'll show you what to look out for on the road. Okay, so once you've got into the car, check your lights light up, make sure the oil light's on, engine management light's on, and normally a battery light and ABS light as well. So once you start it, you should see all those lights disappear, make sure there's no warnings on the dash, etc. And then just listen to the idle. Once it's warm, the revs will drop. So when you're starting out initially from cold, you're probably going to be looking at sort of 1200 RPM it should be sat at. Once it's warmed up, it should drop down to about 900 RPM. Just make sure it's sort of idling smoothly, nothing too lumpy, and it's not cutting out. So once you head off on your test drive, try and find a wide open space, which I know is easier said than done sometimes, but find a big car park, get it on full lock, and do a couple of rotations of the car in both directions. You only need to be in first gear, low speed, and just check that there's nothing binding up, the diffs aren't getting tight, and there's no horrible noises. So some cars come with clever LSDs or tight diffs, upgraded diffs, and they can sound quite loud and quite skippy. You'll hear the wheels skipping, which is perfectly normal, but you just need to know that that is supposed to be happening with that type of diff. So give it a couple of circles in the car park, and then head out down the road and just try and go through the gears. Just go steady, smoothly. To start with, obviously it's cold and it's someone else's car. You want to respect it and just make sure everything is working as it should. Clutch point on these should be normally about an inch of travel before the clutch actually has any feel to it. So when you rest your foot on the clutch, it'll move up and down about an inch before you can feel any tension, and then that's when the clutch will start operating. So once you're out on the road, important thing to test is the gears. So try and get through all the gears in a smooth fashion. You don't want anything crunching, anything grinding or sort of popping out of gear. So just heading out onto the main road now and I'll test that. The other things to listen out for is gearbox winds and transfer box winds. The front transfer box on these is quite common for bearing noise, so it will sound almost like a wheel bearing. The difference is, if you go down the road and turn left to right, where a wheel bearing will change note on the noise, the transfer box won't. It's a uniform noise that will stay there all the time, and it normally gets worse with speed. So the higher speed you go, the louder the whine is normally. But it's quite difficult to tell, especially with these cars with loud exhausts. You can't always hear it over the exhaust noise. This guy's letting me out, so we head down the road. Speaking from first-hand experience, when I bought this car, it actually had a gearbox crunch, and it wasn't particularly smooth. So I've had the gearbox out, and we have rebuilt this gearbox, so I know it's silky smooth and it's operating as it should. Good thing to do is stay in a gear, say third, fourth, and just accelerate on and off. Make sure the gear stick actually stays in that gear, because if the synchro is worn, it can sometimes jump out of gear. Just check the operation of the clutch. So best thing to do is in a higher gear, fourth and fifth, accelerate from a low down rev, and then just get the rev to go up into the higher rev range, and just make sure the clutch is not slipping. Clutch job on one of these with a stage 1 organic clutch is approximately £1,500 to replace the clutch, so something to make sure the clutch is good because it's a costly repair. Easy test to do as well on your test drive. While you're out in the car, just check all the lights, check all the indicators. If it's got electric folding mirrors, just check them as well. Quite often motors go on the folding mirrors, something to consider. And obviously make sure the mirror glass moves as well. Being the RS, we don't have any of those luxuries. No electric windows, no electric mirrors. Less to go wrong, I suppose, which is good. And no AYC, so you won't be having to check those things. So on your test drive, you want to obviously go through the rev range, give it a bit of boost as well. Once the car's warmed up, check the coolant temperature gauge, make sure that's at halfway. They very rarely deviate from halfway. Once they're up to temperature, 90 degrees, you'll see it in the gauge on the dash that it will just stay at sort of like a right angle, basically. 90 degrees is normally 90 degrees in temperature. So if it starts creeping up, especially when you're sat in traffic or sat still, there could be an underlying issue there. So make sure the fans are kicking in when you get up to temperature. When you come to a stop, it's good to get out of the car and actually check the fans are kicking in. You'll hear them quite easily. And then when you get a bit of clear open road, give the car some revs, give it a bit of boost, make sure it's revving through the rev range clean, no misfires, no hiccups, no hesitations. I'm not going to do that in this car in this video because we've recently just installed a link ECU and it's actually still on the base map, so I've been told strictly by our technician Josh not to rev it out, not to put any boost through it because he's still in the process of just dialing this one in. So during the test drive, it's good to check things like the aircon works. Again, it's an old car, an old system. Really, generally speaking, the Japanese aircon systems are very efficient. They normally are ice cold. There shouldn't be anything but that. So make sure it's got cold air coming out the aircon. If it hasn't, then you could be into a pump or potentially a aircon condenser. The other thing to check out whilst driving it is, you know, the usual sort of stuff like brakes and suspension. So get the brakes up to temperature, and then you can do some decent stops in it. Try and get up to maximum speed of where you're driving. If it's a motorway, 7 mile an hour, obviously, or you know, more like country roads, probably safer. Do some sort of decent stops. Make sure there's no vibration, juddering from the brakes. And again, same with the suspension, really. If you get on some country lanes, some undulating roads, just check that there's no knocks, creaks, or bangs from the suspension. Being a mechanical car, there's quite a lot of things that noises you do hear, but they're quite heavy on things like drop links, anti-roll bar bushes, and bushes on the rear end as well. So good test to do is like try and do a fairly hard pull away. Just make sure the rear diff's not banging, because the rear diff bushes do get quite weak, quite perished, and they can split and actually cause the rear diff to rock around so much that it actually bangs on the boot floor. From a Mitsubishi service history point of view, the intervals are every 4,500 miles or every 6 months, whatever comes first. And cam belt intervals is every 5 years or 4,000 to 5,000 miles. So gives you an idea what to look out for on the service history. These cars are quite sensitive to wheel alignment as well, so just when you get down on a nice straight road, flat road, you can just check the car doesn't pull from left to right, and especially under braking as well, or hard acceleration. It's a good telltale sign if there's any issues with brakes binding or diffs pulling you one way or another, and if the wheel alignment's correct as well. It should be really responsive, the steering should be sharp, and it should be sort of, you know, very direct. So there you go. I think that's about it really on a test drive. There's obviously only so much you can do in a test drive in a short period of time, but they're the basics to look out for. The main things, like I mentioned, clutch, brake, suspension, any knocks. Listen out for any sort of movement in the transmission and winds. Yeah, the most expensive, most common things you'll come across is the transmission winds. So rear diff, transfer box, they do have a tendency to have bearing issues, and also crown wheel and pinion wear. So that's something that I would say is probably one of the things to look out for. Okay, so hopefully that video is helpful for you, and it summarises up buying an Evo 7. Hopefully it didn't sound too negative, because that's the last thing we want to do, is put you off buying one of these, because trust me, I've been around these cars for over 20 years and I still find them so engaging. They're such a good driver's car. They're so mechanical. They're so responsive, and they just give you a feeling like no modern car nowadays does. Highly recommend buying one. Any Evo, to be honest. If you check our other videos, we've got a few other buyer's guide on the Evo 10, Evo 9. This one will be out, obviously, and then we'll be doing some on the earlier Evos as well. So if there's anything you want to know about an Evo, any questions you may have about an Evo that you're potentially looking at buying, by all means, either drop a question below, give us a call in the office. We'll be more than happy to help you out. And if you can, if you are buying a car, I would obviously highly recommend you get the car checked out by a professional. If it's not us, by all means, obviously use someone else, but it's very, very important to get underneath these cars, as you've seen in the video. So if you could do that, by all means, try and get it booked in. We'd love to see the car, we'd love to help you out. So always give us a call, give us an email, and we'll be sure to help you out. So hopefully this is helpful, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.